And these heavier carcasses do receive a discount on a grid-based marketing system. So they are receiving a discount, but when you do the math at the end of the day, as a producer, you're still able to receive way more money out of these heavier carcasses despite that discount.
Welcome to MeatsPad, a platform to share breakthrough knowledge that is accessible to the entire meat industry. Be ready to hear from meat specialists who will talk about numerous topics in meat science, including animal welfare, meat production, meat quality, and so much more.
This podcast is brought to you by the Department of Animal Science and Industry at Kansas State University, the Niche Meat Processor Assistance Network, the National Provisioner, and Ultrasource, the new standard for innovation.
Since 1883, Ultrasource has been a trusted supplier to the food industry. Ultrasource provides superior kill floor, processing, packaging, and labeling equipment and operational supplies.
Hello, folks. Welcome to the MeatsPad podcast. This is Francisco Najar. I'm your host today. We have a very special episode today. We have our guest interviewer, Dr. Phil Bass, is an assistant professor at the University of Idaho. And what I mean by special is because we have one of his PhD students, Jessica Lancaster, that will be talking today about some of her research that she is currently conducting. Hello, everyone. How's everyone doing? I guess, Dr. Bass, you can introduce Jessica.
Awesome. Thank you. Thanks so much for having us here. I'm really excited about this opportunity to kind of interview my very first graduate student, Jessica Lancaster. She's working on her PhD here at the University of Idaho, has a really cool applied bit of research that she's been working on. And as a result of kind of this interesting hybrid podcast episode, I'm going to do a little bit of that interviewing myself. And kind of set the stage. So first off, I want to just quickly introduce Jessica Lancaster and then ask, Jessica, what is your background and how did you arrive at the University of Idaho and what are your goals?
Yeah, so I grew up in Southern Idaho, and I guess I would say took the long route to get to the University of Idaho. I did my undergraduate at Colorado State, where I was on the meat judging team, and then continued my education at the University of Nebraska, and I got my master's there and was able to coach the meat judging and meat evaluation team. And then the University of Idaho hired two really exciting meat scientists who really aligned with my interests, so that ended up bringing me back to my home state. And I'm wrapping up, or I guess just starting my third year of my PhD here, and then hoping to end up either in academia or consumer education after this.
So really have the drive and ambition to continue to share the knowledge that you're gaining, which is really, really cool. And a really good kind of segue into teaching us about some of the research that you are currently conducting. And it's very timely, in fact, for the packers and processors that are listening to this podcast, especially right now. You may be noticing, if you're a beef processor, you're probably noticing the size of these cattle. Regardless of the size of your operation, big or small, cattle sizes are bigger than they have been in the past. And because of the point in time that we are right now, kind of this mid-COVID situation, we have had a bit of a backlog of cattle in the feed yards. And so it's just exacerbated the situation. So Jessica, first off, can you give us a little bit of background as to how we have gotten to where we are right now with beef carcass sizes?
Yeah, so beef carcass sizes is something that has been a hot topic in the industry for a number of decades. When I started my literature review, I thought it was pretty cool because when my grandma got her master's at Colorado State, her thesis was on carcass size. And at that time, they were way different in size than they are now. But we've continued to see cattle increase in size. And really that's because everything we're doing right in animal science, we're better utilizing genetics, feed resources, and all of these management tools, which is leading to larger carcasses. And kind of the challenge when we get into that is most of these packing plants are built for our more traditionally sized carcasses. And so when we get all this additional mass, it's really challenging to cool down at the same rate as some of those more traditional sized carcasses. And these heavier carcasses do receive a discount on a grid-based marketing system. So they are receiving a discount, but when you do the math at the end of the day, as a producer, you're still able to receive way more money out of these heavier carcasses despite that discount.
And talk just a little bit more about the discount, because we have a number of very small operators, smaller processors who are listening in and maybe don't work on that grid-based pricing system. So talk a little bit about that and why that is a value proposition in the industry.
Yeah, so when we think about the beef industry, we're trying to create fairly uniform products. And if we're selling them to, say, a restaurant, we want to be able to send them a box of beef that is all pretty similar. And so these heavyweight carcasses, part of the challenge with them is their ribeyes are a little bit larger, and all of their products are just heavier because there's more product there. So the discount was kind of put into effect to mitigate and encourage people to maybe not send cattle that were that heavy. And we begin to see these discounts when carcasses reach 1,000 pounds, and they increase depending on the time of the year and what rates or weights cattle are at.
Okay, and so you mentioned kind of the challenge of the merchandising, and we're looking for consistency, right? End of the road is that the end consumer wants that consistently sized product. Now, you've also mentioned a little bit about the challenge of chilling these carcasses, and we haven't, you and I talk about this regularly. We haven't changed much about chilling carcasses for decades, right? It's still the same method. And in many cases, large-scale operations are using spray chilling. Smaller operations are still using the very traditional air chilling. Maybe can you talk about the differences there and talk about some of those challenges with those really heavy carcasses? What happens to the meat itself?
Yeah, so I think that's a good point. If we think about, regardless of the size of the animal, once they're harvested, they all start out at the same temperature. So these carcasses are all really consistent when we put them into the cooler. But if we think about cooling pretty similar to when you put leftovers in your refrigerator, it's going to cool down first at the outside and work more towards the inside portion. And on these really heavyweight carcasses, when we have just more mass to chill down, we really get a gradient effect where that outside is cooling pretty quickly, but inside near the femur bone of the round, it's not cooling near as fast. And as we get into some of the biochemistry of meat, and as we transition from being a muscle to meat, we really see that pH drop really quickly, and that ultimately impacts the protein functionality. So what we're seeing in the first 12 to 24 hours post-mortem is affecting the quality of these steaks when they get to your plate. So it's really a pretty big impact that the first 12 hours plays.
Okay, so you've just said a lot of sciencey stuff out there, and we have to make sure that we make these connections, and that's awesome. I'm a scientist, and you're studying science, so naturally you should be saying that. Let's make sure we kind of boil this down a little bit so it's just a little bit more digestible to what that means to the packer and processor that are out there. What is happening to the meat that is going to ultimately affect the ability to sell that final steak or roast, especially on these really, really big carcasses that are having trouble chilling?
Yeah, so what's happening there is because of the difference in chilling time and that pH decline, we're getting differences in terms of color. And so we've talked to some grocers up here in the Pacific Northwest, and when they're putting these top round or London broil steaks out on the shelf, within the first day, they're having to discount them because of discoloration. And we know that consumers, once they reach about 30% discoloration in these steaks, are unwilling to purchase them. And so when we think about it, if already half of the steak is a different color than the other half, when we put it out, it's going to be really hard to convince those consumers that this is going to be a quality product to eat. And so that becomes a major challenge just from the time we start these at the grocery store.
So with that gradient cooling, as you're talking about, you're almost, for those of you who are just listening in, trying to paint you a picture in a verbal sense, think of kind of almost like a dartboard, a target, essentially. And we have concentric rings of color that we're seeing because of the differences in cooling. And with that high temperature and rapid low pH drop, so it's rather acidic towards the center of that round itself, that's going to affect the color. And are there other species out there that maybe have similar situations, similar end results that might be able to connect to maybe some of our smaller processors out there with regard to pH and temperature decline?
I think to just along Dr. Bass' comment on that color, just to help our meat processors and sometimes either consumers that listen to this podcast, that gradient that Jessica talked about, that's very important, because when you start seeing that towards the interior of the muscle, close to the femur bone, you see a more pale type color that is just related to that acidic or rapid pH drop, compared to the exterior portion of the muscle that is getting that cold temperature, that it tends to have a more dark color. So you see, and everyone has for sure seen that in the store when you have that that type of meat that has those two gradients, and you may wonder why you have that. And I think that's some of the explanation.
Yeah, and one thing I'll add to that is when these primals are getting to the final point, so at about 48 hours, or even when we're measuring them in the retail display, their pH can come back to the same level. And that's really similar to what we see in pork. So there's an issue called PSE, or pale, soft, and exudative, that has been around and known in the pork industry for a while. And it's really, that meat is going to be a lot paler in color, softer in texture, and then exudative. So in the package, you would see potentially a lot more liquid than you would in the other chops that were out there. And so, while this isn't necessarily genetically related like some of the PSE is, we're still seeing some of the similar types and causes. And they've also, in the pork industry, gotten into some really big pork carcasses. And so, even though we've gone to not having as many cases of PSE, we're still beginning to see these challenges pop up again with these heavyweight pork carcasses.
Right. And purge means money. So
yeah, purge definitely means money. Yeah. So purge, that's that watery portion that comes out of meat as you're aging or as you have it just resting in the cooler. And yeah, and that's water loss that's not being able to be sold in that ultimate final package. So yeah, absolutely. So there's benefits to bigger carcasses, as you've mentioned. The producer can get more money as far as pounds are concerned. Now they may have lost a little bit of value potential if they're merchandising their carcasses based on a value-based grid system. For producers that are selling on the live weight, it's kind of a moot point. I mean, it's just a big animal that way, and you're just going to get more pounds, more dollars that way. So there's some opportunities there. But of course, the challenges that you're observing, Jessica, is kind of the chilling process, and how do we overcome some of that? So kind of just to wrap a little bit of your thoughts up, based on some of your research that you've conducted, what are your observations as a conclusion, and what are some of the solutions you may be able to provide?
Yeah, so I think it's really important that we can provide some solutions as a meat industry, because our producers are doing a really good job of providing us high quality cattle. And so I think it's really important that we look at how we can alter this in a plant situation. So we've seen in the chucks some opening up of seams or pulling off muscles that has helped alleviate cooling issues. And so I think that there's the potential to do that in the top round. I also think another option is, from these larger cattle, we're getting really big steaks. And so if we could potentially divide those steaks into smaller portions that are more similar in not only color, but also eating characteristics, that would provide an extremely uniform, not only package for the consumer to purchase, but also a really uniform eating experience when they grilled those up for their family.
So what I'm hearing is that everyone should stay tuned for the Lancaster steak coming out of the round at some point. Is that what I'm hearing?
Yep.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
That sounds pretty
We'll
cool.
have to have like another name for the other part, but we'll come up with something.
Well, and that's the cool thing about meat science is that we're going to take that, as I joke, it's probably longer than 10,000-year-old, but that 10,000-year-old piece of technology called a knife, and we're just going to use it just a little bit different, and come up with another way of merchandising these carcasses. The animal hasn't changed in muscle and anatomical structure. They're just getting bigger, and it's time that we just kind of continue some of the work that some of the National Cattlemen's Beef Association has done over the past, and a lot of the research that has been conducted at, say, University of Nebraska, University of Florida. We have some great bovine myology background and understanding of the muscles themselves. This is the next phase. This is looking at kind of more the contemporary sized carcasses that are out there. So very cool.
One quick question, and it's related to our current situation with all COVID-19. Are we expecting, since we saw like in April and during the spring that few plants closed down and because of the spread of the virus in the plant, and they were able to slaughter those animals, could you expect some animals or that prevalence of big animals increase?
Yeah, Cattle Fact sends out reports, and as we look at the numbers on those, we see that carcass weight right now is abnormally high for the season and only projected to increase. So it's going to take quite a bit of time for this to be resolved. And a lot of these cattle, it's not that there's just extra inches of fat on them. They're just big cattle that are still really favorable in terms of yield grade and quality grade. So I think that's a really important takeaway too, is it's not producers feeding these cattle for an extended time to gain more in terms of pounds. They're getting them to where they need to be.
We have an animal that has amazing growth potential. The farmers and ranchers have done their job in picking the right bull and the right cow to have an efficient, high growth animal. And then of course we had this unpredictable phenomenon happen, and that really backed up the cattle supply. And something that I think I think is really cool about cattle is that we can put them out onto pasture and onto rangeland. And COVID happened right when the grasses were really starting to come on good, and so we could take some of those animals that were destined for the finishing phase, set them out on pasture for a while, and kind of slow down the process a little bit. But the result of that, I wholeheartedly believe, will be even bigger calves coming off of pasture and range, going into the feed yards that are going to be even bigger. And so, honestly, from my point of view, Francisco, is that we're going to have some pretty big animals for some time now, and maybe at least until the next big calf crop starts coming through. So,
This is amazing because now Jessica's research will be very applicable for the following months.
My graduate work a little over 10 years ago, I was intentionally trying to find big carcasses for some of kind of what Jessica is looking at right now. And the really, really big ones were 850-pound carcasses, right? And I just counted this year alone so far, we've had average carcass weights in this country, steer carcass weights that are over 900 pounds, average for 11 weeks out of the total number of weeks that we've had so far. So the average is going to be very big this year, and the animals are big. And Jessica has kind of alluded to the fact that we have some challenges in the plant to overcome those animals, or to work with those animals. We have some challenges with the merchandising, but thankfully, serendipitously, I know that at the University of Idaho, and then a number of other great university meat science powerhouses across the country are also trying to work on this whole large carcass situation already. And so I would say that we're already pretty well set up for success that way. And so hopefully we'll just have some good information and data to share with the community coming forward. So
Great.
So if I could, I would still like to ask Jessica one quick question. What kind of advice could you give to an incoming graduate student, or even a high school student trying to figure out what they want to do academically, And what can you tell them about the meat science career path?
Yeah, so I think the biggest thing is definitely check out Meat Sciences. We've talked today a lot about the research, and a lot of it's conducted in plant or in packaging, but there's tons in terms of research and development. Everything from this past week, we had our international meetings and we talked about things like sales. There's work in terms of government branches. So really everything you can imagine is encompassed in the meat science industry. And one of the cool parts is, even though we've gone through this COVID pandemic and it's been quite stressful, people in the meat industry still have a job, and that's one of the nice things about agriculture. And so I think as you look at your career path, it's really important to find something you're passionate about. Even in your undergrad or grad school days, some days are really long and hard and you wonder why you're doing it, but when you have that passion, it certainly makes it a lot easier. And then be afraid to try things you may not like. It's really these opportunities that allow you to learn, and it's a lot nicer to do it while you're in school than getting a degree and suddenly realizing you don't like your career choice. So that would be my biggest advice, and always be willing to reach out and make a connection. I know that the connections I made in my undergrad and master's days have really served me well.
Don't be afraid to try things is what I'm hearing. So that's pretty cool. All right.
Wonderful. I want to thank you both for being here on this podcast. This is great. I think this is a start for future roundtables that we can do. Well, thank you a lot for being here.
Yeah,
Thank you, Francisco.
All right, with that, we end this episode. Thank you a lot for listening, and be ready to hear from more meat specialists in the following episodes. We will have more discussions about hot topics in the meat industry. Please subscribe to our website at www.meatspad.com, and you will receive a welcome email, and you will also be receiving notifications on the new episodes that we're releasing. Thank you again. Stay tuned and see you the next time.